Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for affording me the opportunity to join you by means of this video message on the occasion of the 82nd Annual Conference of the International Fertilizer Industry Association. Our collaboration between the International Fertilizer Industry Association and the United Nations Environment Programme dates back many years. It was in 1996, with the publication of a joint report on mineral fertilizers and the environment, that we began to tackle a challenge that ranges from the issue of food security to issues of energy, climate change, land use, that involves very centrally the question of the use of nutrients, particularly also of phosphorus, nitrogen, other micronutrients, in addressing the question on how on earth will we feed a population of 10 billion people by the year 2050. Our collaboration since then has also led to the establishment of the Global Partnership on Nutrient Management. In this partnership, we have collaborated both based on scientific evidence and also on the frontiers of technology and innovation that will allow us to address the future use of nutrients, but also fertilizers, in addressing the question of the future of agriculture, which indeed is related not only to the question of food security, but also to issues that have increasingly come to the forefront. It is no accident that our collaboration involving the environmental dimension of agriculture and the use of nutrients and fertilizers has gained more attention and also prominence. Some of the direct but also indirect consequences of an ever-growing use of fertilizers and a release of nutrients into our ecosystems, and also, sometimes surprising to some, having impacts even well beyond the terrestrial domain in terms of our oceans and the phenomenon of deoxygenated zones and dead zones, has certainly given rise to much more discussion and also inquiry than we would have anticipated perhaps 10-15 years ago. Our collaboration through the Global Partnership has been central to allowing both the United Nations Environment Programme, but also many of the actors in the industry and in governments to focus on the challenge that I would describe as too much or too little of something usually is a problem. It may sound oversimplistic, but the phenomenon that we face and the challenge that we are also asked to address today is how in some parts of the world and in some sectors of agriculture, too much release of nutrients and too much use of fertilizer clearly is acknowledged as having begun to have negative impacts and consequences that not only affect a particular harvest or a particular farming sector, but consequences that ultimately impose on society and our economies costs that we have to address more actively. Yet at the same time, there are parts of the world, not least in the continent of Africa and even here in Kenya, where UNEP is headquartered, where too little application of nutrients and the availability of fertilizers has constrained the intensification of agriculture, and therefore is also affecting not only the prospects of food security of a country such as Kenya, but indeed of the productive potential of this continent. However, and I think this is our common challenge, extrapolating a simple formula that the more fertilizer we use, the more food we will produce, and this into eternity, clearly is something that has not borne the test of time. Even here in Kenya, a headline in the papers just a few weeks ago in one of the most fertile parts of the country, the Rift Valley, indicated and also pointed to the fact that soil fertility was being lost, soil productivity was declining, in part because of a very intense use of fertilizer. So even within an economy, an agriculture economy such as that of Kenya or many other developing economies, the question of simply saying more fertilizer is an indicator for greater food security and more production is not something that I think any of us believe answers the question of how we can address this issue. It is also clear that governments have increasingly, for instance through the Global Partnership of Action on Land-Based Sources of Marine Pollution, through the Rio+20 Summit in 2012, and most recently also through the Global Forum for Agriculture that was hosted by the government of Germany in Berlin, articulated a very clear agenda in which we must address the question of how will we continue to intensify agricultural production through the use of fertilizers. How can we raise the productivity of the agricultural sector and also of the small-scale farming sector, and at the same time decouple, if you want, from this increased use of chemistry and technology, the kinds of impacts that are perhaps in the past viewed as unintended consequences, but certainly today are part of the formula with which we must assess the mix of instruments and technologies that are at our disposal. In the United Nations Environment Programme, we firmly believe that the Global Partnership on Nutrient Management provides us with an excellent platform for addressing these issues. Clearly, we must look at some of the options that are available to us today to also evolve the technologies that are at our disposal, the kinds of fertilizers, the applications, the efficiency, but also move beyond simply a formula that tries to optimize available technology and move into frontiers where we look at enhancing soil productivity, agriculture productivity, by methodologies and by investments that perhaps go beyond the traditional approaches. In the work of the United Nations Environment Programme, the theme of a transition towards a green economy has become a central driver of our work in recent years. It looks, on the one hand, at the frontiers of technology, be it in the renewable energy sector, but also in green chemistry and many other areas, but also focuses very much on understanding natural capital. Natural capital as being a key part of how economies can measure their wealth, their productive factors, and therefore the agricultural economy, the rural economy and the agricultural sector are central factors in determining whether a country can intensify and increase production without depleting and diminishing its natural capital. Soil erosion, soil degradation are clearly factors that have already begun in many parts of the world to cause exactly that, a diminishing of that natural capital. Therefore, the frontier of our collaboration in the next few years should move not only along the tracks of efficiency and new technologies, but also exploring new approaches of how we can work with nature. Much of the 20th century was, in a sense, guided and driven by the frontiers of science and technology that allowed us to bring many new opportunities and solutions into the marketplace. However, the marketplace alone cannot determine whether a sustainable agricultural production system is going to be the automatic consequence. Indeed, at the beginning of the 21st century, we are faced with many challenges that in part also relate to the use of nitrogen, phosphorus and other micronutrients that have become part of a promise of agriculture and food security, yet are inextricably linked to the question of how can sustainable agricultural systems, the maintenance of ecosystem functions and services, and also the secondary and tertiary implications of energy use, carbon dioxide emissions, be brought together into a, let's say, future-oriented compact and agenda for addressing these issues. I hope that our collaboration, and particularly you in the industry, in the International Fertilizer Industry Association, will continue to lead some of these international debates and discussions, and particularly through your membership also, be a key part to finding solutions to what are increasingly becoming dilemmas. Dilemmas are never a good formula for trying to address a world that is still in need of greater energy security, food security, yet at the same time is confronted by enormous depletion of its natural capital and natural resources. Water, soil, the quality of our environment clearly are fundamentally premised on our ability to feed ourselves. Yet the answer, I think we all agree, has to be more than the simple formula of more of the same will somehow help us to move forward. Please count on us in the United Nations Environment Programme to continue to reach out and to be part of the thought community and also of a practitioners community trying to move the boundaries forward. Through our global partnership on nutrient management, we have a platform that involves virtually all the actors that can bring parts of these solutions to the table. I wish you a very successful international conference in the beautiful city of Sydney and look forward to working with you in the years ahead based on the successes that we have already achieved in the past. Thank you.